AI has been released in many tools, and one of those tools is Make. Recently, Make has released Make AI agents, which is a different way of looking at creating automations. So in this video, I'm going to look at how to use Make AI agents and when to use them compared to regular Make scenarios and automation that is API based as opposed to AI agent based. In a traditional Make scenario or API based automation in general, you think about the workflow. So if this happens, then this happens, and you branch out all the logic in a decision tree fashion. So you can exactly map out all the steps that happen if a certain condition is met. When you think about AI agents, the mindset is a bit different. You want to think of them like an assistant, essentially. You give it a goal. So the first step in building an AI agent is to define the goal. What's the task, the outcome that you want from that agent? For example, let's say you want to manage client communications and automate updates whenever you want to send them. Then the goal would be communicate the update to the client when requested. Then you want to identify the required tools for that goal to happen. So if I know that I want to communicate updates to the client when I instruct my assistant to do that, what tools does the assistant need in order to perform this action? What are all the potential options? For example, the assistant will need access to our project management system to check the info about the contact, maybe the project status and the latest steps. It will need access to my email to send the email, maybe to Slack if the client communication happens on Slack, to send the Slack message, or to any other platform that is involved in this process. And so when I think about what tools need to be available for the assistant to do its job, but I do not want to define how I want the assistant to do the job. So I want to define the what, not the how. And that's one key difference between building an AI agent and building an API-based classical standard automated workflow. So then in Make in particular, once I identify the tools, I create Make scenarios for those tools. So in Make, the tools are scenarios, meaning the Make AI agent will have access to a set of scenarios that it will use as tools as needed in the process of making its decision and achieving the goal. And once those scenarios are identified, it is very important to set a name and a description in this so that the AI agent will decide what scenario to use based on those. And then you want to connect these scenarios with the agent. And that's very easy. I will show it later, practically speaking, so that the agent can access those scenarios and determine which one is best to use on each run. And finally, you want to set the foundations to actually trigger the workflow. So what's the trigger? It might be a message that you send on Slack on a specific channel or a direct message to a bot. It might be a specific button that you click on your CRM or project management system. That is up to you and something to define. What starts the workflow? What starts the request to the assistant? And then we want to test this out, iterate to make sure that it works properly. And then once everything is ready, actually activate the scenario so that the requests can be sent officially to the AI agent and it will make decisions. For this kind of workflows, you can also combine the Make AI agent with the human in the loop module and concept that's available in Make, and that adds a layer of verification by a human in the whole process. So that's something to consider here. Now let's look at how to practically create a Make AI agent. The first thing to do to create the AI agent is to go to the dedicated tab, AI agents here. And then I will create a new agent, which I already did here. I named it email communications agent. And then I can configure it. And the first thing to do is to add a system prompt. This is a simple description of what the agent does. In my case, you are an expert project manager managing client communications. That's the agent description here. In here, you can see there are agent settings. In the setup phase, you will be asked to select the AI provider. In my case, I chose OpenAI, but you can use any other provider out there. And you will need to establish a connection. So making sure that you have a developer account and you add the connection and the dedicated API key accordingly. You can then select the model to use for the AI. In this case, I'm using OpenAI, so here is a list of all the available models, and I selected one of them here. You can also set limits for the output tokens, steps per agent call, and the number of agent runs. You can always save the agent here, which I already did. And the next step is to think about what tools do we need to run the agent. So what are the possible actions that the agent can take, and how can I provide these actions to the agent so that whenever I want it to run, it can select the appropriate tool and make the right choice. In Make, tools are scenarios, meaning I need to build a scenario for each tool that I want the agent to run. And it's important to note that the scenarios used as tools by the AI agent need to be scheduled either on demand or they need to be run immediately. So there needs to be either a webhook based trigger for whatever app you're using, or the custom schedule needs to be set on demand. Otherwise, you're not able to select the tool for that agent. So you can see in my example, I added 3 tools, 3 scenarios, and the first one is to look up contact info to send the email, and another tool is to send the actual email. So once we have the contact information, we can send the project update to the client. And the third tool is to look up the project status. So if you look at it chronologically, likely the agent would first look up the project status that we request to send an update for. The agent will then look up the contact information to get the email of the person to whom we will send the email, which is the third and final step in the process, assuming that the contact info is found. So in here, when I click on the settings, you can see the scenario description. This is important so that the agent can actually decide whether to use that scenario or not. So besides the scenario name, adding a scenario description is very important for the agent to run properly. And if you look at the scenario here, once you save a scenario, you can add description here from options, and then you can edit the description right there. So this scenario or tool looks up the contact information. So you can see there are just 2 steps, 2 modules. One is a Notion module. You can see it is scheduled on demand. That's what I was referring to earlier. That's where I can set the run scenario on demand. That is very important here to make it work. Now we have get a database item. That's a Notion module, because this process assumes that I'm running the project management system in Notion and I want to send an email to the client for updates. I will trigger the request to send the email via a webhook in Notion directly. So I can be in my project management system. I can trigger a webhook, which starts the agent, and then the agent takes action, looks at the latest project status, looks at the contact info, and sends an email to the client with the latest updates. And because the email is generated by the AI agent, it is not hard-coded. It is rather changing each time, very likely. So keep that in mind. And that's one advantage of using this approach, but it might also be a disadvantage of it if there isn't enough data, or if you don't keep the data very accurate and up to date in your project management system. So there are some assumptions here that you need to keep in mind. In this example, I'm not implementing human in the loop, which might be also useful for this case. Human in the loop is the concept that you can have a human review the email generated by the AI, for example, before approving it for sending it. And there is a dedicated module in Make here called human in the loop for that. But here I'm not using that. I'm just sending the email directly. So in this tool or scenario, we are looking at the contact ID, and the contact ID is passed as a scenario input. Contact ID in here. And then we output the contact email so that we can pass it back to the AI agent that will then send an email. So use the send email tool to send the email to the actual contact. So you can see how the logic works here. And if you look at the lookup project status tool or scenario, you will see a similar logic. And this is likely the first tool that the agent will run. Once I trigger the webhook to run the agent, then the agent will look up the project status and the contact info and then send the email. So this scenario gets a database item from Notion here as well. It gets the project ID as well here is a scenario input that I set from this setting here. Scenario inputs, project ID, just like that. And the scenario output is the project status, which I want them to use in the email. And so I map the status name from the project that we get in the first module to the output so that it is passed back to the agent so that it can include this context, this information in the email that it will send. And the final tool is to send the actual email. So this one just has one module, a Gmail module. There are 3 scenario inputs: email to, email subject, and email content. These scenario inputs are dynamic. It's the AI agent that when it runs, it defines these inputs, it passes them through this scenario, and then we use those inputs as variables in the email module so that we can send the email. In this case, I hard-coded my email address just for testing purposes. But here, I can select email to, so that the email is the actual client email that every time changes dynamically to send the product update. But in this testing phase, I'm just hard-coding it for myself. Then I map the email subject from the scenario inputs here, email subject, and email content from the inputs as well, because this will change every time that the AI agent runs, and they are set and passed to the scenario dynamically by the AI agent. So after I created these scenarios, I made sure that the agent has access to them by clicking on Add, and then I select the scenarios so that they are here attached to the agent and available for use. They also need to be activated, keep that in mind. Then I saved it. And the final step in this process is to create the scenario that actually runs the agent. And in my case, as I said, this is a 2-step process. I'm in Notion, my project management system. I'm going to trigger a webhook via a button, for example, with some parameters. And then I run the agent, and the agent will take care of the rest. So let's look at the scenario that triggers the agent. So here is the scenario that triggers the agent. This doesn't need to be attached to the agent itself. It just runs the agent. So the trigger is a webhook, in my case, with some parameters that I send from Notion. And when this starts, it then runs the AI agent here. That's a new module in Make. I then selected the AI agent to run. In my case, it is the email communications agents. It shows the system tools available. If I want, I can also add additional tools or scenarios for this specific use case, because maybe I want to have different runs and use cases for the same agent. In my case, I don't want that. I can also add a thread ID to give some additional context for the run and history to draw from. Then I add system instructions. In my case, I want to upload the data in 2 variables, email subject and email body. You can recognize these from the send email tool that I showed earlier. These are the variables that we pass as scenario inputs and we map in the Gmail module to send the email, and they are dynamically set by the AI agent, as you can see. Format the email body in HTML so that the email is properly formatted. Write in a clear, concise human tone. Use hi as a greeting, all the best as the signature, and then other instructions to just make sure that it writes as I like. You can also see that you can use variables here to specify additional instructions. So these are system instructions, general behavioral instruction for the AI agent. Then there is the message. So the message is the actual content of the project that I want to pass to the agent so that it can send the email properly based on the project context and decide what tools to use. And the message is: first, look up the project status and get all relevant info. Second, look up the contact info. And third, create and send a project update email for the project. Then I pass some values, the project ID. This is mapped from the webhook as a URL parameter, the contact ID as well, and the project status, that's a scenario input. So I selected it from here, variables, scenario input. And this is a scenario input that will be passed automatically from the lookup project status tool that I showed you earlier, because we return this as an output and then it is passed dynamically to this as an input. Now let's look at how the webhook trigger is set up in Notion so that you can understand the full process, because this is the last thing that we're looking at. So for example, here is a project database in Notion. And if we look at it, there are two ways to trigger a webhook from here. One is via a button like so, where I can set up the button property, and then the automation will be send webhook. I can paste the webhook URL from make and pass all the existing properties. The other option, which I would use in this case, is a formula that has URL parameters. So I would create a formula here. And then the formula would be link, and this takes two parameters, text and URL. Let's say send project update, and the URL would be the make webhook URL. So I would come here, I would copy this, then go back, paste. Then I would add a question mark so that I can append parameters ID, that's the ID of the project, then close parenthesis, and then I would do plus ID, which gives me the project ID in Notion so that I can look it up via the tool for the AI. And then I would do plus and, so I can attach additional parameters, contact ID plus, and then I would have the contact ID. In this case, I do not have a contact here because that's only a test. For example, let's say I can do let's say blocking dot ID. Plus is blocking. Usually, if you're using Notion as a project manager, you might have a contact relation property that links to the contact in Notion. And so you can map that to get the ID of the contact and pass it as a URL parameter to then use in the webhook. So that's what the formula looks like. Okay, now I'm going to use a test that I already have to show you an example. So then that's how you would set it up. And finally, let's look at a full run to see exactly what happens behind the scenes in Make when I trigger this kind of webhook automation. As an example, I'm going to trigger this webhook that uses test data. And you can see that this starts the trigger agent. So it starts the webhook. It passes data to the AI agent. The AI agent, you can see here that it ran the lookup project status and it got the result. It ran the lookup contact and got the dedicated contact. And then it also sent an email here. So if I click on any of these, I can actually see the output of the run. So for the scenario agent, I can see here the prompt. The response, that is the project update, has been successfully sent to Simone. If you need further assistance, feel free to ask. I can see the AI usage, the times it took to do specific actions, the token usage, the price. So you can also use this data to actually tally up how much you spend for using the AI model behind the agent. It looked up the project status here, and you can see it found the project, and it passed the project ID and the project status to the output, and then got it back to the AI agent. It also looked up the contact info properly here, and it got the contact email associated with that, and it sent an email. And the email was sent to the dedicated contact with the HTML body right here and the dedicated subject. So now, if I look at my email, I will find the email that was just sent to me for the project update. And here is the email with the custom subject and the email body here, properly formatted. You can see project status is bolded. That's all done by the AI agent. And you can see that in this use case, I only include the project status as a variable in the body or as instruction to the AI agent. But if I had a more elaborate project management system where I also keep track of all the statuses, I could actually pass the latest status update. There might be a more narrative text for the AI agent to process and then create a dedicated email update based on that. So it provides rich context to the client. And this concludes the overview of how to use Make AI agents and create your own use case with agents. If you have questions, let me know in the comments below or contact me directly via the link in the description, where you will also find relevant links and info about this subject. Take care and see you soon.